Hello and welcome back to the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. This is Penny Sansevieri and Amy Cornell. We're going to talk today about money. And I know that's not a very fun topic. It's not super sexy or glamorous, but I think especially these days, it's good to get a good grasp on budget and, basically paying for your book marketing if you choose to hire a company. I mean, Amy, give us a little bit the genesis of this idea.
Yeah, for sure. So as Penny's mentioned on a lot of shows, typically I am the first person authors that write to us will engage with initially, check out their platform, their books, what they have going on, their goals, things like that. And obviously we need the money thing. It's a thing. Like Penny said, it's not sexy, but it's important. So a lot of authors, honestly, they come to us and just admit they just have no clue what to expect when it comes to a budget. So when we ask them, what is your budget? It's not uncommon for authors to say, well, I'm not even sure what to say. Like this is my first book. This is my first time, or this is my first time trying to hire someone, potentially not going it alone. So, and we have a lot of conversations around money, paying for it, budget, what to expect, things like that. So we just thought it would be good to do a show outlining some kind of industry expectations and best practices. And obviously we can't speak for all the other companies out there, but either way, this will be educational for anybody listening. And maybe you'll feel a little more confident when you start talking to companies or to a marketing person about what your options are and what you're willing to pay for, and what, it might give you some perspective on what you might need to learn to do on your own as well. You just never know.
Well, and I think that's a very good point. And I also think it's worth mentioning that rates vary wildly in this industry. So you will go from somebody, and we're going to talk about the really cheap marketing, but says, I can do something for $50. And you'll have companies that say, our minimum is $8,000 or $9,000 a month, and they work on retainer. And I want to say up front that not every marketing company works on retainer. So it's traditionally, when you think of a publicist, you think of a publicist on retainer, right? But we've never worked on retainer. And part of the reason why we've never worked on retainer is because the retainer really doesn't benefit the author. And the reason for that, even though it sounds really cool to have a publisher, I have a publicist on retainer, that sounds really cool. It doesn't, for reasons that we'll get into on this podcast, it doesn't necessarily benefit you to lock yourself into 6 or 8 months with a publicist, because things change. And Amy, why don't you start us off and talk a little bit about some of the things that you see, and then we'll dig more into the retainer topic.
Okay, yeah, that's a great idea. We'll kind of go through some examples of situations that we've had with authors over the years, and kind of go through why it works, why it doesn't, the reasoning behind it. Again, just to give everybody listening a little better perspective on the inner workings of how this stuff usually goes. So we get this quite a bit where authors do, in theory, we get it, but where authors say, can you work on commission? Can you work on a percentage of royalties, a percentage of sales, whatever version of that you want to call it? And I mean, obviously speaking for AME, like, we can't do that. And the reason is, it has nothing to do with not believing in your book or not respecting that you're on a budget. The reality is, so much of marketing is front-loaded effort. The prep work that our team goes through to be ready to actually start executing the marketing is just as extensive as the actual execution itself. So the planning, the creative, the strategizing, the media list pulling. I could go on for quite a while, but there really is a lot that we do behind the scenes in prep before the work even begins. So for a lot of authors that work with us, before your book even releases, so after you sign the contract, we get to work right away. So that's a reason why, like a primary reason why commissions and royalties and things like that are just not feasible, because so much of the work happens before the book realistically has a chance to even start taking off and gaining momentum and actually getting a reasonable amount of consistent sales across the board.
Right. And, the other piece of it too, structurally, most publicity, I would say all publicity firms are not set up to do a percentage of sales. So literary agents get a percentage of, if a literary agent gets you a deal at a publishing house, they get a percentage of the sales of your book for the life of the book, right? But they are set up accounting wise to manage that. So going to a PR firm, a marketing firm, and saying, I want to give you a percentage of royalty, we're literally not set up that way. And as Amy pointed out, you would be tethered to giving them a percentage of royalty for years and years and years. And I'm not really sure that any author necessarily wants to do that, or that it's a smart business decision either.
Yeah, that's very smart. The longevity behind that is just kind of a mess to even wrap your mind around, honestly.
Right, exactly. And the other piece of it too are crowdfunding campaigns. So I'm not a huge, I don't, Amy's already laughing.
Sorry.
I'm so not a huge fan of crowdfunding campaigns. At the same time, when we've worked with authors who have done very successful crowdfunding campaigns. Crowdfunding campaigns are a lot of work. It's kind of like, and I know we're not talking about Patreon pages, but it's kind of like every author has a Patreon page, right? And 99% of them are doing it wrong. Crowdfunding campaigns are a lot of work. And most, if not all, marketing companies are not going to help you manage your crowdfunding campaigns, hoping that they'll get a percentage. It's not a bad idea to find somebody who is an expert on crowdfunding if you seriously want to do that, to raise money for your book, and you have multiple products to offer people in exchange for their, contribution. You could hire somebody to do that, but marketing companies they're not gonna help you. I mean, certainly we're not set up to help you, manage your crowdfunding. Also, I sound bitter about crowdfunding, so you probably don't want to have me back. Oh, crowdfunding. And the only reason is because, so part of it is too that this is where authors can spend a lot of time spinning their wheels, wasting valuable time that they could be getting the book out there and marketing the book. And it happens. So to Amy's point about the commissions and the crowdfunding stuff and some of the other things that we'll talk about, when authors jump into publishing headlong and are not prepared to spend money, to invest money. I mean, Amy, you had an author last week who shall remain nameless, who asked you, I just want to see how my book's going to do first and decide if I need to hire a marketing company. Was that?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, they came to us and got some initial information. And then I'm sure they were a little overwhelmed at all the different, like that all of a sudden It's like, whoa, this is a real decision I need to make. And so their response was that, well, I'm not really ready to decide yet, because if I sell a lot of books without marketing, then obviously I, essentially don't need to hire someone.
And I wish eye rolling burned more calories. I mean, I sound really mean. I'm sorry. This is not mean Penny in October, but honestly, I mean, you can fritter away a lot of your book's life waiting for magic, right?
Right. Absolutely. And I think to your point, Penny, when you mentioned that if you're serious about doing a crowdfunding campaign, finding somebody that actually does specialize in building those and the structure and how to execute them, I think that's brilliant, because we say it a lot, we're a relatively small team, and we focus on marketing books and getting them in front of readers. So if you're talking to a marketing company, and not to go off on left field here, but if you're talking to somebody who you went to for marketing, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, we can do that too. Oh yeah, you need your car washed? We can get somebody over there this afternoon. It's like, all of a sudden you should be wondering, like, why are they doing all this non-marketing stuff just to get my business?
Right.
So that's one thing too. Crowdfunding and marketing is they are different animals. So yeah. I think that's another takeaway here, is that if you're going to a real reputable marketing company, they should really just be focused on the marketing and getting your book out there. If they've got a lot of other extraneous services, then, make sure you do your due diligence and check reviews and get references and things like that to make sure their focus is really on all the right things.
Yeah.
And I think another one, and this is one that I guess now it's my turn to sound a little bit snarky, but a lot of marketing companies are not set up as banks. And I say that again, not to actually be rude or dismissive, but it kind of ties into the first point, is that the work is being done no matter what. So when I say they aren't banks, we do get a lot of people that say, well, hey, can we give you some money now and some money when it's all over? And that's essentially like taking a loan to some degree. You know what I mean? Like, we're just going to wait. We're good for it, all those kind of things. But in the meantime, put yourself in the company's shoes. They're still putting in the work.
Yeah.
And marketing, very good marketing could be done. And I hate to say it, but that doesn't necessarily mean your book is going to get you a return on your investment and a predictable timeline. So sales and really great marketing, those timelines, those aren't the same timeline. Very rarely do those parallel each other exactly. So, don't expect a marketing company to take that kind of risk or to essentially loan you their team's time to put in all that work and all that effort for, you know what I mean? And then hold off on potentially getting paid at a later date. The work really needs to be paid for when it's done, just like anybody else, running a business out there. Marketing is, you've got real people doing real work that specialize in certain areas. And it's definitely an art. Good ones are very good. It is an art, and there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's a very good point. I mean, I think that, financing a campaign is not something that most PR firms do. And it does get to be a little bit tricky when you, like in our case, because the campaigns are so front loaded, so much of our work happens in the first 30 days, depending on the length of the campaign that somebody hires us for, right?
Absolutely.
Setting up accounts, doing optimization, creating the pitch, sending the pitch, finding media, et cetera. Now, and the other piece, and Amy already sort of touched on this, if you hire a reputable company, you're paying for them to get your book out there, but you are responsible for creating something that people actually want to buy, right? So that's where I talked to an author the other day, and he said to me, I had a lunch with somebody who told me that my book could be a Netflix movie and a New York Times bestseller. Mm-hmm. And he said that he could turn that into, a Netflix thing and a New York Times bestseller. And I said, trying not to be bitter or weird, I don't think that anybody reputable would actually say that. And he got a little quiet, right, when I'm chatting with him. But I said, nobody worth their salt in this industry is going to promise you fame and fortune. So that's where you have to create a quality product. You have to create a quality book. And we're very particular about, obviously, the authors that we work with. And Amy's very, very good at vetting people when they come in. And also, might I add, with a nod to her, giving a lot of free advice. Now, please don't email Amy for a bunch of free advice because she'll get mad at me that we run this podcast. But, she's oftentimes like, give it some pushback, like your cover could be stronger, or you need to set up your Amazon Author Central, or, you need to have a website. Hiring a marketing company does not guarantee you book sales. The book is the only thing that can, for lack of a better term, guarantee you book sales. The book has to sell.
I think that's so smart.
Well, yeah. I mean, and we've had this conversation numerous times, and we're always very straight out with people, because the worst thing that we can do is bring somebody in, like the guy at lunch with the big dreams and the Netflix show and the New York Times bestseller, and tell somebody that they have the ability to do all those things and then shatter a bunch of dreams. I mean, that just feels a little scammy. Sorry.
No, I think that's a really good point because, so much of budgeting and understanding what marketing is going to cost you and things like that, it's really tied into expectations as well. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, Penny, that, hiring a marketing company is not the quote unquote easy, albeit maybe slightly more expensive way to guarantee success. You're going to be quite a few steps ahead if you've written a great book, by all means, but if it were, I joke sometimes with clients that, well, if it were that easy, we could charge a lot more,
Right. Right.
If we could guarantee success, we'd be charging so much more, in and out, we got you, no big deal. We wish it were that simple, but it's definitely not. So should we I want to cover a few kind of situations, I guess, when people have a certain amount of budget that they know they're working with.
Yeah. So, but I also want to just say, just to close out your topic, the job of a reputable marketing and PR firm is to set the best possible table that we can for your book. But nobody can force somebody to sit down and have a meal, right?
Exactly.
That's at the end of the day, what your book has to do. And you really want to make sure that you're working with a company that has the tools to set the best possible table for your career and your future.
I love that. And now I'm hungry.
I know. I am too. It's getting to be lunchtime. All right. So let's talk about some other things that you mentioned when we were in the green room before the show.
Yeah. General ideas for budget. So I personally think that if you have a few $100s to spend, or let's say if it's in the hundreds, I personally would recommend one, education. I'm kind of stealing Penny's bullet point, not really, but that's definitely something that Penny always drives home. Definitely plan to educate yourself and consider doing a coaching or a consulting session with a marketing person to help you develop an outline and a really solid, strategic, smart DIY plan. And the reason I say that, and now everyone's like, well, that's a lot of work. I have some money to spend. But honestly, you could blow through that budget of just a handful of hundreds of dollars very quickly on a lot of strategies that won't necessarily move the needle if there's not some plan to it. If you don't have an outline, if you don't have steps for the next 6 months kind of planned out, it's easy to blow through money, when you don't have a plan, is what I'm trying to say. So honestly, if you have less than $1,000 to spend on marketing, I really do think that money is better spent consulting with somebody who can help you establish a really solid plan. Mm-hmm. And then you just dedicate some time to learning how to execute those strategies on your own. We have a ton of resources. There's a lot of great resources out there on all the things, and consistency is really the most important part. A lot of this is not rocket science, but it's having a smart plan and it's being consistent and, just getting the right mindset and sit down and write it out after talking to somebody. And I think that's a much better use of a budget if you have a less than $1,000 than randomly buying one-off marketing strategies off of websites and things like that.
Right, exactly. And I think that if you have, let's say, a couple $1,000 for the life of your book, so I'm not talking about, I want to spend $2,000 a month. If you have a couple $1,000, I think it's going to be really important for you to zero in on what you really need. So let go of what feels flashy, right? And figure out what you really need. $2,000 to market your book is good for structure building. Okay. So split your efforts between some paid strategies. Like we do one-off Amazon campaigns, and that's pretty much the only single focus campaign that we offer separately from working with us on bigger core marketing efforts. But use that money to build your platform, because honestly, if you fritter away a couple $1,000 going after, running ads on Facebook or, running ads on social media or buying media lists or sending a press release without a structure in place, I can promise you nobody's going to give your book a second look. If you haven't spent the time writing a good book description, right? Or that's a good opportunity to do some coaching on, let's take a look at my book description. What do you think? We aren't copywriters. I just want to be really clear on that, even though Amy is a great copywriter. She could absolutely be a good cop, but we're not copywriters. That's a whole separate specialty, actually.
Oh, yeah.
But figure out, kind of like, not to get back to the eating analogy. Apparently I am hungry. But, building the legs on the table. I mean, I would never launch, if I were a new author, I would never launch a book without making sure that my Amazon Author Central, and, a lot of this stuff is free, right? Making sure that I had a good website, that I followed the rules for a good website. I mean, get a BookBub profile, get a Goodreads profile, do all of the things so that, your money will go a lot farther, truly.
Right, Penny. I love that. And that was a good, plug, but it actually is very true about our Amazon campaigns.
Yeah.
They are slightly smaller scale, but it really it's kind of that insurance that you have an outside perspective from somebody in the business that is looking at your Amazon presence, which is essentially where you convert shoppers to buyers. Put some money into making sure that once people get to your retail page, you're more likely to actually make that sale.
Yep.
And that's something that's worth spending some money on. And then, as Penny said, there are so many other things that you can do that are actually free, getting on Goodreads, even things like that. There's so many ways to network and use other strategies that are really inexpensive or free on your part to push traffic to Amazon. But making sure that retail page is really ready to rock and roll and work for you is something that you don't want to risk messing up, because a lot of times you can't get people back. Once their first impression is just kind of so, it's very hard to convince them to buy at a later date.
Yeah, exactly. And, we actually, in a very different way, so a bunch of years ago, we had an author who pitched himself to O Magazine, and actually got in. Not only was there no website for this author, but he had somehow messed up his Amazon page, so his book wasn't showing up. The ebook, which would have been a great sell in this case, was not even launched. I mean, it was a disaster, right? I don't know. I mean, I have to say, honestly, while the book was great, O Magazine must have had a spot to fill, because otherwise they would have looked at this and said, because what ends up happening, right? And this is part of the reason why we kind of pound this home in a lot of our podcasts. Let's say, for example, you get a producer from the Today Show or O Magazine, whatever, that says, hey, I might be interested in interviewing you as an author. If your book isn't available, if you look like you just showed up to the party in, I don't know, your PJs or something, right? They know that if consumers are viewing this or reading about it and they can't get your book, they're going to call their office.
Oh, yeah.
And they're going to get an angry email or something like, oh, you have this author on and I can't get their book. I'm telling you right now, it doesn't look good on them.
Exactly. It affects their reputation by making essentially what looks like a half-assed recommendation.
Right. Right. Well, here's a book that might be available in the next 6 months. Good luck, because people will forget.
Oh, right? Absolutely.
He sold not one single book from this O Magazine mention. And never went on to publish another book again because he was so discouraged. So just, I mean, I realize that's kind of an extreme example. Apparently we're all about food and extremes today.
I know. Well, and Penny, we've done a show and y'all can find it on, our mixed feelings about expensive display advertising as well, kind of in the same vein, that spending a lot on an ad in a magazine or on a website that gets a lot of great impressions and has a large readership or viewership sounds great. But when they land on your Amazon page, if you can't back it up, it's wasted money.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I guess moving on, we've covered a few budget ranges, honestly, realistically across the industry, if you have at least a few $1,000s to spend and you're kind of open, that's going to be a more realistic place to start talking to marketing firms that do robust campaigns, that really will work with you for at least the first 30 days on Amazon, if not a little bit longer, depending on how they're structured. And again, this is more, we can't speak for anybody else, but this is more helping you set up expectations or even planning. If your book's coming out next year and you're thinking about hiring somebody, this is kind of to give you a guideline on what you can expect to start seeing when you're talking to people. With that in mind, both extremes. You have to be careful of both extremes, and we are very careful about, an author may come to us and say, this is my first book. I don't have a website yet. I don't really love social media, but I'll spend $20,000 on it. Right. As much as that sounds awesome and wow, we'd love $20,000. The reality is that's not a good use of your money, not out of the gate, at least, Yeah. If you're going to keep writing books and if you will have a website eventually, so we are actually very realistic about what makes sense for an author, not just because they have the money to spend or don't, about what their market requires, what their readers like, what the genre standards are, what your platform looks like, even what you're willing to do. We make different recommendations based on an author coming to us and saying, I will never get on social media and you can't make me. Yeah. So really what you're willing to do also should matter to a good marketing company and what they recommend and what they end up telling you a realistic budget should be to work with them. They really should be taking your goals and interests and what you're willing to put in and what you're not willing to put in into consideration when making recommendations and giving you a marketing proposal.
Right. Exactly. No, I think that's absolutely true. And I also think that if you, I talked about this in the intro, right? Some companies do work on retainer. We do not work on retainer. And here's why we don't work on retainer. When we put together a campaign for your book, we're looking at some of the things that Amy talked about, right? The budget is consideration, setting the stage to bring readers to your book, making sure that we are dividing up that budget in a way that best supports the book and the author and their goals and the genre and all of that. So there's a lot that goes into these proposals. One of the things that we don't do, and for the 22 years that I've been in business, we have never done this. We never lock authors into campaigns that are 6 months and longer. There are companies that will do that. And I'm not necessarily telling you don't hire those companies, but there is some consideration here. So first off, things will change. Okay. When an author says to me, Penny, what if I want to work with you after this campaign is over? Great. We love that. We actually have a very high rate of return authors that we work with again and again and again. Part of the reason for that is because when we get close to the campaign ending, we come back to the author and we say, you know what? This might be an area that we want to expand upon. So let's continue working together, doing this one thing or doing these two things, because we've essentially done the heavy lifting of setting up your Goodreads profile, making sure that Amazon is tight and working and your Amazon ads are working for you. But there might be things that we, that areas that we want to continue. And that continuation is generally less than the larger campaign, which saves you money, but it's also, I think, more strategic for the long term, because people say to me, how long should I, market my book? Well, I mean, how long do you want to be an author? I mean, if you just published one book and that's right. Kind of, you know what I mean? I mean,
oh yeah, I think that's a very good point, Penny, because we get a lot of authors that, and I think we touched on this also. We did another full length episode on, essentially how to get your money's worth when hiring a marketing firm. Mm-hmm. So that is a very good one to listen to in tandem with this if you didn't hear it the first time, or maybe listening to it again now that we've talked about budget. Maybe some things will make a little more sense. But the length of the campaign doesn't necessarily make it better.
Right.
Because you're paying for people to kind of be there. That's kind of like what Penny was saying about being on retainer. I'm available to you if you need me. It's like, if I need you, like, well, what are you doing during that time?
Right.
And so, yeah, don't just pay for time, pay for strategies, pay for what they can do for you. Again, this ties into the other episode that we did, like, know what everything that you're paying for, what that's supposed to produce for you. What is it doing for you long-term?
Yes, exactly. And it's also, if I've gone out and I've pitched you to the media and I've pitched you to doing, for local book events, and I've pitched you to bloggers, I'm doing follow-up, but at some point you do, get to the end of the road in terms of pitching media. We've talked about this before in a podcast that we did on, timelines, and when is it, when your book gets to be too old. And if your book is, 6 months older, it's going to be much harder to get into major national media unless there's something. I mean, obviously the exception is something ties into it. There's something going on. And then, the media today, and you wrote a book that's a little older. But that's part of the reason why I'm not a huge fan of retainers, because it's not really a strategic way, in my opinion, to market your book. The other thing that I think is important to mention is that whether you're spending $3,000 or $10,000, you should be qualifying your marketing team the same way. And you should be asking smart questions. Never make assumptions. I cannot tell you how many times, and we probably covered this in the other show that you mentioned, but I cannot tell you how many times that I have talked to authors on the phone. And it's really sad, actually. They are discouraged because they worked with a company who made them a lot of promises, but there wasn't a lot in writing, and there was nothing basically delivered. So get it in writing. Make sure that it doesn't matter the cost. Make sure that you know what you're getting, when you're getting it, what the deliverables are, what the promises are. Absolutely, right. Bottom line.
Yep. I think that's so smart. Like you said, Penny, whether it's inexpensive or expensive, it doesn't make either option the right option for you.
Right.
So there's really no easy answer here, but that's why we did this show, because, we want y'all to be better prepared and to be smarter and more strategic about the decisions you make about your book. So just know there's not an easy answer to how much you should budget or pay for your marketing, but we've given you a lot of tips and kind of guidelines so you can figure out what should work for you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think finally, the last point that I want to make is that sometimes I talk to authors who say, well, I'm going to invest X amount, and then I want to see what comes back to me. Right. So the whole ROI conversation, whatever, and Amy's going to probably leave this podcast now because we have all these conversations about how difficult it is to predict ROI. Part of the reason why this sets you up for failure is because many times books, or maybe a better way to put it is many books take a lot longer to find their footing. Right. And some books, obviously, if they're not good, if they're not on the market, not spot on in their genre, et cetera, lots of different issues can impede your book success. I don't think that it's necessarily wise, as Amy pointed out, to throw $20,000 at a book and just say, hey, make me famous.
Right.
But investing in a book is an investment. Not all of it's going to come back to you. It's just like starting a business, which we talk about, I know, ad nauseum sort of on this podcast, because I don't feel like it's hammered home enough.
Right.
It is a 100%. Business. You make an investment. 22 years ago, the money that I threw at this business took me months and months and months to see that come back to me. But you have to be in it. You really have to be in it for the long haul. I hope that you've enjoyed this. I hope we haven't been too much of a buzzkill. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. I want to also mention that we always welcome reviews. We love reviews wherever you listen to podcasts. I am working on the relaunch of How to Sell Books by the Truckload. And if you've read, I know it's a lot of work. If you've read the book, I would love to get, if you have an idea of how it can be better, how, what you wish you could have seen more of or less of or whatever, feel free to email me. Our contact details are in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.